Right, hello everyone. There's about 25-ish people watching right now. I think we'll give it about maybe a minute or two more just to let a couple more people join. All right, I think we could go ahead and get started. So just to introduce myself, my name is Aubrey Taylor. I am the content strategist for the Mayor's Office for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Um, just want to start out by thanking everyone for joining us. This is the first of our series of online and in-person technical trainings for the Rapid Acceleration, Innovation, and Leadership in Sacramento grant program, which is also known as RAILS. So our office, the Mayor's Office for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, is about 2 years old now. We kind of serve as the liaison between the innovation community and City Hall, as well as the Mayor's Office and more recently the Economic Development Department. Some of you have heard about us through the Creative Economy Grant or Pilot Project, where we were working on connecting or funding projects from creators, makers, and entrepreneurs around food, tech, and art to stimulate the creative economy throughout Sacramento. Others of you will know us from our previous round of RAILS grants, which was the first round of RAILS grants a couple years ago. And we'll get into more details about that later on. As you can see at the very top of the screen, we have a link for submitting questions. You can submit a question now if you'd like. However, we kind of suggest that you hold off until the end in case we cover the question in the presentation. So I will introduce my colleagues shortly, but before I get into that, we'll just go through the agenda really quickly. We'll go through the overview and purpose of the RAILS grant program. We will cover the application process as well as what the application looks like. We'll talk about the focus areas. We'll talk about funding and grant categories, eligibility. I've got application process on there twice. We'll only do that once, I promise. Policy guidelines, review criteria, and then we'll talk about our statements of inclusion and the city's youth program. And then we'll just kind of touch on resources, and then we'll go through the questions you guys have. So now we'd like to hear from our Chief Innovation Officer, Lewis Stewart, to touch on kind of the mayor's vision as well as the Sacramento Urban Technology Lab.
Good morning, everybody. This is Lewis Stewart. I'm glad that you guys can join this technical assistance program that we have. And since starting the job in May, it's been an honor to work alongside the mayor and the team here to develop out a new look and feel for Sacramento's innovation ecosystem. And RAILS is a big part of that. We launched what's called the Sacramento Urban Technology Lab in November with the mayor, and basically Sacramento's now becoming known as truly the farm to fork capital of the world. We have a creative economy that's on the rise and a hunger for the new digital economy and creating a more inclusive economy here in Sacramento that has high wage jobs and a more robust private sector. And working in the mayor's words to transform Sacramento into a destination city. And with the Sacramento Urban Technology Lab, or SUTTLE as we call it, it's a chance for people to come discover, launch any ideas they have, and then scale their businesses with us here in Sacramento. And it's built around what Stanford studied called the triple helix, where government, industry, and academia work together to really create an environment to thrive. If you just take any two of those three pieces, you only get part of the equation. So it's important that we try to work together to build this, so that it's not tech for tech's sake, but it's more citizen-centric in nature, where we're building a community throughout Sacramento that has visibility and access to new technologies, and have a chance to learn alongside and in some cases develop innovators and entrepreneurs from the ground up. So part of the strategy that we have here in the unit is to align as many programs as we can touch with the Sacramento Urban Technology Lab verticals, and that's what we tried to do with the Rails grant. The Rails grant this year is really focused on building that framework here in Sacramento, and building upon the mayor's vision of innovation and jobs, workforce development, and really transforming Sacramento into a more destination and inclusive city. What's the next slide? No. So actually I'll go through just some of the verticals real quick, and then I'll turn it back over to Aubrey. So when you look at applying for the Rails grant this year, you'll see that there are particular sectors called out, including mobility, clean tech and sustainability, cybersecurity and IoT, government and civic tech, workforce development, food systems, and health IT, and life science. Those are important sectors for us to look at as we grow the economy here in Sacramento, because they're all market driven. They're all sectors by which you can create high wage jobs. And if there's a way to increase that capacity here in Sacramento, we'll have a more thriving and inclusive economy as a whole. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Aubrey.
Thank you, Louis. So briefly, I'll give a little bit of background about the Innovation and Growth Fund. It was approved in 2016 by the Mayor and City Council. Basically, it was a reassignment of redevelopment dollars that the city had in a fund that were no longer able to be used for redevelopment. The thinking of the council was to create a fund that would invest and catalyze in the innovation community, and grow the innovation ecosystem. So from that fund, and when that was approved, our office, the Mayor's Office for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and as well as the Rails program, were created. So the entire fund was created out of $10 million that were in it, and the Rails program is a $1 million annually funded program. That first year, we had 15 grantees who were awarded. Let's see, I don't believe it's in the next slide. Again, just touching on briefly, because we'll go over them more later. But they were in the areas of startup enablers, so training programs, co-working spaces, incubators, accelerators, maker spaces that are growing and kind of laying the foundation for startups and kind of emerging technology in Sacramento. So the purpose of the Rails program, oh, there it is, of course, I put it on there. So the first cohort, we gave over $950,000 worth in grants overall. And those grantees, by the end of their contract period, were able to leverage an additional $4.8 million of investment, whether that was in kind or actual cash investment, either through being able to leverage their status as a Rails grantee, or because the funds were catalytic to kicking off the program and other people wanted to help sponsor them. But the nice thing about this grant, and the thing that we're looking for in applications coming up, is being able to leverage the investment that the city gives, because it might not be a big investment for some of these programs. However, being able to leverage that into further investment to be able to grow your programs is something we are looking for. So the purpose of the Rails program is to catalyze innovation in the innovation community. Individuals, startups, companies, and nonprofits are invited to apply for the grant funding. And what we see funding through this program is incubator and accelerator programs that provide mentorship, networking, and education, so that startups and entrepreneurs are able to raise capital, grow their businesses, and create jobs. Programs that accelerate the commercialization of emerging technologies. Companies making it easier to work with and in Sacramento. Co-working spaces and nonprofit organizations bringing together the innovation community in Sacramento. Startups that are focused on improving the quality of life in cities through the Subtle framework. And education programs training our next entrepreneurs in technology and business, to include Sacramento-based startups, as well as offering STEAM education for youth. Within that are focus areas that Louis mentioned, the seven subtle verticals: mobility, clean technology and sustainability, health, IT and life sciences, food systems, IoT and cybersecurity, government and civic technology, and workforce development. Included in that are startup enablers, which is most of what we funded in our previous round. So, maybe incubators and accelerators that may not have a specific focus within the verticals, but are working to build up startups, within those verticals, and as well as social innovation and entrepreneurship programs that might be able to further support an ecosystem of social innovation and entrepreneurship and bring those solutions to scale. In the guidelines, you'll see there's some guiding questions that are supposed to help as kind of a thinking point for if you're wondering what a project under one of these focus areas might look like. And so hopefully that gives a little bit more illumination. We'll go through the application process really quickly. Hopefully you may know the project or your applications are due by May 7th at 12 p.m. and that's noon, that's not midnight. So please be mindful of that. We wanted to make sure that any last minute questions were not coming in at 4:30 p.m. on a Friday. So hopefully that works for everyone, and we're able to get good quality applications in on time. The timeline that's mentioned, where eligible projects should begin on or after July 3rd, which is subject to change. We're hoping to have everything get started by the beginning of July. So when you're thinking about when you're going to need the funding, think on or after July 3rd. So after applications are submitted, the review process should conclude in semifinalists near the end of May. And we're hoping to have a pitch day on June 4th. And that's where the finalists will present their application or their project to the review team. So in the application, we are looking for a completed application form, which is a Google form, and we'll go through that shortly. We are looking for a project budget. We've got a budget template, which is linked in the project and is also linked on the guidelines page on the left-hand side where it says resources. And we are looking for references, which is a new feature that we haven't asked for in our Creative Economy or previous Rails grants. So definitely keep an eye on that if you've submitted any other applications to us in the past. So that part, I'll just talk about it for briefly, and Ash may have more information. For the references, you'll need to provide 3 professional references that can validate your capabilities and work ethic. Do you want to go into that at all? Okay. So Ash doesn't want to add anything else to that. So we'll look at the application really quickly. So when you go into the application, when you go to the application page, I'll go back really quickly. This bit.ly link is a simple way of remembering bit.ly/2018 Rails app, Rails all capitalized, app all lowercase. It'll take you to our application page. It will require that you put in an email address before you can go any further. That's to make sure that your application is saved when you get started. So after you put in your email address, it'll take you to the application. It's only 1-page form. So it's a decent number of questions, but you should be able to come back to it and edit it. So beginning of which we'll ask your name and the name of your company organization and a phone number to reach you. We'll ask for the name of your project as well as a website. The website is optional. If your project does not have a website, that's not going to be required. Next, we'll ask about what type of entity you're applying as. Do you want to talk about the importance of that?
Yeah, so when the city does its contracting, we can basically contract with you as an individual or an organization. So we just want to know what type of entity, whether you're going to be doing it as a sole proprietor or under an organization, how you want to be signing the contract.
Perfect. All right, so next is the focus areas, which we went over earlier and are explained in more detail in the guidelines. So you'll want to select the most relevant focus area. If you touch on multiple, you can select multiple. However, just the most relevant is the one we'd like to see the most. And then we'd like a short description of your project. So basically, in 140 characters or less, what is the objective of your project? And then the long description is also, well, it's 300 words or less. However, we'd like to know, I guess, more in depth what you're hoping to achieve with your project. Anything else? Nope. Okay. So further details. What will you accomplish as a direct result of receiving a Rails grant? So here we're looking for what are your project's deliverables? What at the end of 9 months are you, will you have to say? Will it be how many students you've put through a program? How many startups will have been incubated? How many training classes you'll have offered? We'd like to know what are the deliverables from your project. Next, how will you measure your project's success? So that's kind of the metrics of your deliverables. What are you doing now versus how you like to grow? What are some of the, maybe less tangible metrics that you'd like to have out of the project? If you do training for students, what type of feedback are you looking for? So how will you know that your project has been successful? How will your project make a difference? This is something that is part of some of our criteria that will go on later, is the impact on Sacramento. So this is something that you'll definitely want to make sure you're clear about, is what type of impact you'd like to have in Sacramento, in the innovation community, social impact, those kinds of things. How will your project be inclusive? So how will your project address equity of access and inclusion for underserved groups, or just smaller communities that don't typically get the attention of city programs or other programs? How will your project be collaborative? This is something also we'll take a good look at. Grantees that collaborated with other grantees seem to have more success. So something that we're definitely looking for is how your project will work with other organizations in the city or outside of the city, to maximize your impact. Next, how will your project be financially sustainable after the grant period? So these grants are intended as a seed. They're not intended to necessarily sustain you as you continue on in the future. So how will the money that you receive through this grant program catalyze your program continuing after those 9 months are up? Anything else? Okay. All right. So the estimated start date. So this is estimated start date and estimated end date. This is to kind of get in our minds what the contract period would look like. This is kind of us getting some preliminary information so that we can hit the ground running if you're chosen as a finalist. Project locations. We would like to know where you'll be housed, where you'll be running, what communities you'll be working in. This is something we'd like to know. Is your project located in or primarily serve residents of any of the following neighborhoods? So this has to do with our equity piece and some preference points, which we'll talk about later. So these are some of the neighborhoods that the city has identified as priority neighborhoods. So if your project is primarily serving the residents of any of these neighborhoods, we would definitely like to know. How many participants do you expect to engage through your project? So this is just kind of a standard question. What is your impact going to look like? What is the project's leadership team involved in this project? So who's on your team? Who's on your board? Who are the people who are going to be touching this project? Who else is backing your project and what are they contributing? Obviously, as you can see, this is not a required question. However, if there's an organization who sponsors you, or who's sponsoring this project, or even giving in-kind donations, we'd like to know who else is kind of a benefactor for this. So next is budget information. The grant category is the next part. We'll go over that a bit later, but there are 3 grant categories in this grant program: acceleration, innovation, and leadership. And they each have their own range and kind of specified uses. The next is requested grant amount. So this is to say, within that range, how much are you requesting for your project? Now, your grant application will definitely fall under one of these 3 categories. If you applied for the Creative Economy grant, you know that you had the possibility to apply for one or the other grant category. However, in this grant, because of the specifications of each grant category, it'll only be one category that you fall under. The next question, please list the sources and amounts of any matching funds that will be provided to the project. So this is kind of what I mentioned earlier, where projects that are leveraging other funds tend to do better. So as a note, any grant applications that are $100,000 or more, we're now requiring a minimum one-to-one cash funding match. We've been notified that we have to specify cash funding because in-kind donations don't count in the one-to-one match. So if Microsoft has agreed to let you use some of their products for your program, that doesn't count toward the one-to-one funding match. Next question is to submit your grant budget. You can find the template. I'm going to click on it. You can find the template online. It's a Google Doc. You can go ahead and download it. If you applied for the Creative Economy program, it's a very similar process. You download the document, add to file, download as, and then you can edit it. We put together a little sample budget. This is from my limited experience, very limited experience, and so I kind of broke things down in a way that may not be fully accurate for putting together a program. However, I hope you get the gist of what we're kind of looking for. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always submit it to us, and we'll talk about that later as well. So I think we're getting close to the final questions. Under previous city support, we have, are you a 2016-17 Rails grant recipient? Which we're anticipating applications from most of our previous grant recipients. As well as the next question, total amount of city funds awarded or received in the last 36 months. That these questions come into play as far as contracting. I think the city just wants to make sure that they're aware of what the people we've contracted with previously and whether or not those contract agreements were were not violated. I think is the idea, right? Okay. So next is the references section. And of course, 3 professional references, that's all in one question. So you'll have to use your commas effectively. We'd like the name, title, affiliation, relationship, email address, and phone number of those references in case we need to contact them. The next question is your organization, 1,000 strong employer. So this is another question that we're giving preference for, is whether or not you're a 1,000 strong employer or planning on being a 1,000 strong employer, which will be, you can include in your budget. If I go back, that is something that you can request as part of the funding for your grant project is 1,000 strong intern. And then is there anything else we should know? If we have not been as thorough as we possibly could with our questions, you can let us know if there's anything else that you think we should know for your grant application. So let me go back. All right, so we'll quickly go over the grant categories. And as you can see, we have 3 grants: the acceleration grants, the innovation grants, and the leadership grants. The accelerator grants are for accelerator and incubator programs supporting Sacramento startups through mentorship, networking, and education, as well as programs that accelerate the commercialization of emerging technologies. The minimum request amount is $50,000, and the maximum for that grant is $250,000. This is the grant category that you can request the most in, but as I mentioned earlier, it's for specific uses. So just because you want more money for your program doesn't mean that you'll fall within that. So it's wiser to focus on the content of the grant when submitting your applications rather than the price tag. Next is the innovation grants, which are for civic tech companies and organizations, making it easier to work with and in Sacramento, local organizations bringing together the innovation community, or startups focused on improving the quality of life in Sacramento through the SETTLE framework. And that category is from $20,000 to $100,000. And then the final category is the leadership grant category. That's for educational programs, training our next entrepreneurs, as well as STEM or STEAM training for youth. And included in our guidelines are information about the city's youth policies, which if you are falling under the leadership grants and you're working with youth, it would be wise for you to review. And then really briefly, funding requirements. No grant request can receive $250 or $250,000. So if your project will require more than $250,000, you should look to get outside funding for the rest and make that known within your application. The amount requested must be justified in the project budget. Kind of as I showed you earlier, you'll have to break down, and it doesn't have to be finely itemized. We don't need to know how many capacitors you ordered for your youth training program. You can say you ordered supplies for building circuits, and break it down that way. But you do need to justify what you are using the grant funding for. As I mentioned earlier, there's a minimum cash grant match of 1-to-1 for grants over $100,000. And that must come from either your organization or a third party. And applications under $100,000 with leveraged funding sources may receive preference. So now I'll turn it over to Ash, our bureaucracy hacker, to talk about eligibility and some of the other requirements.
Thanks, Aubrey. Hey, everyone. This is Ash. Glad you are all able to tune in. I'll be pretty quick here. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. So just to cover some of the minimum requirements, basically you can apply, again, as an individual or organization. Public agencies are not eligible for funding unless they're an educational institution, such as a school or a university. Projects do need to be within the city limits. And then previous recipients are eligible for funding. We're anticipating that about 30% of this year's funding will go to prior year recipients. And also this last point, it's a little subtle, but it is important, which is we are going to be looking for capacity to actually implement what you're proposing to accomplish. So we love to see really ambitious ideas, but it's also important to be realistic about using the resources that you have to achieve the goals that you've actually set out. So there's basically 3 rounds of scoring that will occur. There's actually 4 if you count the minimum eligibility, but presuming that your project is eligible, all of the eligible applications will first go through an initial scoring process, and that initial score will be based on the Innovation and Growth Fund guidelines. So those guidelines say that all funds distributed through the Innovation and Growth Fund have to do one or more of the following: create jobs, make it easier to conduct business, increase revenue to the city, accelerate growth, encourage diversity, and leverage funds with other private or public funds. Assuming you hit one of those guidelines, we'll then, as another part of the initial score, we'll be looking at your past track record. We'll be looking at your plans and how you intend to achieve the objectives of the program. We'll be looking to see if it fills an industry gap or local market need. And that's part of why we've introduced the subtle framework. We also want to make sure that, if the city's making an investment, that it's actually going to be catalytic. It's going to do something different than you, or it's going to help you scale at a level than you would otherwise be able to accomplish without city funding. And then we want to also make sure it's providing value to the larger ecosystem. And then, of course, we want to be looking at your deliverables and metrics. Okay, so let's assume that you've made it past the initial scoring round. At that point, there will be a more in-depth review of your application. And so that's going to be based on 40% potential impact, 25% equity inclusion, 20% investment leverage and financial sustainability. Then lastly, 15% would be the community partnerships and collaboration. And I think we've already touched on a lot of these points and what you're looking for. So if you do have follow-up questions that are specific, feel free to ask them. But the point here is we're estimating that there will be about 40 to 50 semifinalists, and these are the criteria that we're using to determine the finalists. So there's also preference points that will be available. The first are if you're a 1,000-strong employer, and the second is if you are conducting activities in an underserved community, or you're targeting a population from an underserved community. And so to elaborate on that point a little more, in 2015, the city had designated something known as priority neighborhoods. And that was taking data that the city has at the census tract level, looking at crime, poverty rates, unemployment, and property values. And so basically, these data gave us some indicators on the areas that are more distressed in Sacramento. And so these are areas that we think technology and economic development could really serve as catalysts for revitalizing these communities. So that's part of what we're looking for there. I won't go through the list of neighborhoods, but they're listed up here. If you happen to be confused about the particular borders of these neighborhoods, go ahead and just Google City of Sacramento neighborhoods, and it should be one of the first search results that will take you to maps that we have on the city's website that you can look at the specific boundaries of these neighborhoods. So I'm just going to give some examples of previous grantees that we've had. Square Root Academy received a leadership grant last year. They were focused on teaching kids with STEM education. An example of an innovation grant is Startup Sac. You can look at their website, startupsac.com. They've done a great job bringing together the innovation community, sharing news and information about who's doing what. Another example of an innovation grant is Hacker Lab, which used their grant to purchase additional equipment and expand some of their services that they were offering. And then lastly, an example of an acceleration grant is Entrepreneurs Showcase, which is an affiliate of Impact Venture Capital. they put on a fairly large event at the Golden One Center, as well as administered their accelerator program for startups that were looking to grow and scale. Just really quickly on the guidelines, you can read our statement of inclusion that really touches on the equity and inclusion components of the scoring criteria. And then, as Aubrey mentioned, if your program is serving youth, the city did last year adopt a new youth development plan. And so those applications that are serving youth are going to go through an additional vetting process to ensure that they're meeting the city's standards for quality programming for youth. And so again, on the guidelines website, you can read the full details on that. So I'm going to hand it back to Aubrey, who's going to close out here and move us into questions.
All right, so just wanted to share some links to our resources. The application portal, as I mentioned earlier, is listed here, as well as our online Q&A forum. This link will take you to our it'll take you to our GitHub account, which if you'd like to submit questions to, we have a Google form that will take the question that you submit and post it to the GitHub, so you don't need to create your own GitHub account. You also, when you submit your question, you can include your email address, so when we answer the question, we can be sure to share that directly to your email, so you know when to check back. The idea behind making the questions public is that we know that if one person has a question, it's very likely that others will have that question, and we'd like to make sure that everyone has access to the answers, even if it's a question they hadn't thought of themselves but would still like to know the answer to. We have a Facebook group for Subtle. It's not as heavily used as our Creative Economy group, but we would love to have you visit and post. And if you'd like to find collaborators, that's always a venue to possibly do that. And then our contact email address is mofi@innovatesac.org. And then finally, we have 2 more workshops. Our next workshop will be in person here at City Hall on April 18th. I didn't put the time, but the time will be 6 p.m. And our final workshop will be online on May 2nd, right before the deadline for those of you who are working on finishing it up and just thought of a question. So that'll be May 2nd, and I believe that is at 10 a.m. Wanted to get an early one, so we'd be nice and fresh. And that one we hope will be, or we expect that one will be more Q&A. This workshop is live and will stay live even after we are not recording. So we hope that others will watch the link if they have not had a chance to tune in. All right, and then as a final reminder, because I didn't remind at the beginning, please read the guidelines. They will answer many, many questions and go much more in depth about what we're looking for, what the projects, what the criteria are, what the guidelines are, obviously, and kind of give some more information on how you can move within the subtle verticals in your application. All right, so now if we haven't answered your question, you probably have found the link at the top of the page and in the video description, and we'll go ahead and get started on answering those. All right, so Laura's question, are all 3 workshops the same content? They will likely be similar. However, especially with the questions we're expecting, we'll probably touch on different topics each time. But hopefully, if you're able to make this one, you won't miss out if you don't attend or view the next two. So, long story short, we're trying to hit as much as we can in case someone is not able to make the next two. Thank you, Laura. Our next question, will we have access to successful proposals from the prior Rails grant round? You want to answer that?
Sure, yeah. So we're actually in the process of publishing our report on, it includes all sort of the activities and results from the prior year grantees. So we hope that'll give you a good sense of the types of programming that we supported. If that's still not, if you're really looking for the proposals themselves, we'd be happy to follow up and provide that information to you. It may take some digging for us to track those down, but I think to get it sort of, there's an implied assumption to this question, and it has to do with the quality of the application. We are much more concerned with the substance of what's being proposed and not necessarily the application. So we're more interested in the program, not the proposal. Not sure if that distinction is super clear, but I think if you want to go ahead and follow up with us after we post the detailed information about the prior year grantees, feel free to do that, and we can get you the actual proposals.
All right, thank you. So the next one, Aubrey just said 9-month grant period, but the instruction on the application says 12 months.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm gonna go through the application and clarify that. There's actually, I caught something earlier that said 2019 and 2020 when we actually meant 2018 and 2019, so we have to fix that. But the idea is there is sort of a ramp up time that you may need to account for. Obviously, the city has a lot of steps in its own internal processes to actually issue payments. And so the idea is it's likely going to be a 12-month contract. But if your program is reliant on actually receiving the check in order to get started, you may want to just create like a 3-month buffer so that you're giving yourself enough time to receive the payment and purchase whatever you need to get started. So that's sort of why that exists, but we'll come back to that and clarify it in the application.
So for something like a workshop or accelerator program, would the time mentors volunteer for the program be something to include in the in-kind value? I know it doesn't count for one-to-one matching grants over 100K. You want to answer, Lewis?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to include any kind of investment into your project. So if there's a value that can be placed on in-kind, it's absolutely critical to show any investment into your project possible. So the cash to cash or the one-to-one match for the cash is one kind of data set that we're looking at for investment into the city and the project. But in-kind is important too because it helps to show the sustainability of what you're working on.
Thank you, Lewis. The next question, can you recommend insurers that satisfy the insurance requirement?
No. Well, maybe offline. I mean, really, it's a very, very basic requirement that almost any insurance provider will be able to meet. So what we can do is post the examples of the specific requirements in the policy that you'll need. And the best thing to do is to just take those and send them to several, not just one, but several insurance professionals and get several different quotes. And basically, as long as all of the folks you're seeking quotes from meet the city's contracting requirements, you you should probably just go with the lowest cost one. But the reason why I said no initially is it's not really in the city's interest to be recommending different insurance providers.
Thank you. Next question. What do you do if your requested grant amount is less than the stated granted category that you fit in? Either of you want to take that? So if they would like to request less than the minimum for the grant category.
So I think the best answer is if you have a program or service that falls below the floor of the $20,000 level, you're welcome to still submit your application, but this may be an avenue by which you can actually leverage partners that get you up to a level. Since that collaboration and partnership piece is a big component of what we're looking for in this round of Rails grant. So it may provide an opportunity for you to reach out to a collaborator to make your project happen.
Thank you, Lewis. All right, the next question. How do you know which category you fall under in acceleration, innovation, and leadership? Is it solely based on funding amount? The easy answer to that is no, it's not solely based on funding amount. I would take a look through the guidelines quickly to just kind of break it down. But so for each grant category, the acceleration grants are mainly for the incubator and accelerator programs that offer mentorship, networking, and education to startups or for programs that accelerate the commercialization of emerging technologies. I'm going to hit the highlights. Ash has the full guidelines here, but I'm just going to hit the highlights for you. The innovation grants are for civic tech companies, local organizations that bring together the innovation community, or startups that are focused on improving quality of life through some of the subtle categories. And then leadership grants are more toward educational programs or educational training programs, as well as the STEAM programs for youth. So I would definitely encourage you to read through the guidelines and see where your project would fit. And if you still feel like you're not sure which one it might directly fit under, you can send us an email and we might be able to clarify that for you. Thank you. Rose says, is this being recorded so we can refer back to it? Absolutely. You will be able to find it at the link, I believe at the link that we sent to you. Otherwise, we'll make sure it's posted any and everywhere because, for anyone who was not able to tune in.
Yeah, if you're watching this on YouTube right now, the same link that you're watching it at, the archive video will be available on the same page. So, we'll post it both on the guidelines and our innovatesac.org website.
All right. Laura says, is the $1 million already allocated to each grant category, or is it fluid based on applications received? So the $1 million is a hard $1 million for the entire for the entire Rails grant program. So the city has told us there is $1 million that we can use in Rails grants per year. That's the current policy. So we're held to that. I'm going to skip that. Let's see. All right. Assuming projects inside Sac County, outside Sac City are not eligible, do you distinguish between distant county and unincorporated county near Sac City?
Yeah, so the requirement is it needs to be within the city of Sacramento. So really, if it's unincorporated, it's not in the city limits.
All right. Will the finalist criteria be determined after the pitch?
The criteria will be the same. For the semifinalists and finalist criteria are the same. So it's possible that if you make it to pitch day, your score will change based on your pitch, but the same criteria will be used for that phase of the selection process.
So we have a bunch more questions. Show. All right, next question. Will we have access to success? Oh, I already answered that. Sorry about that. All right. Okay, I guess next one. So the city insurance requirements, we'll make sure to post that in the question and answer forum. And you can also find it on the city's website, correct?
Yeah, we're going to post it. We're going to post it on the guidelines and innovatesac.org. So we'll follow up.
Okay. Next question. Thanks for a great presentation. Thank you. If you're not yet a 1,000-strong employer, do you know how long it takes to become one? Do we know how long it takes to become one?
Yeah, not sure about how long it takes to become one, but really the unfortunate reality is for this year that period has already closed. We're not. I mean, we'll see what applications we get from other folks. We're actually really trying to set ourselves up for next year so that there is an expectation that we required it this year, that when the application for employers opens early next year, that folks will have a chance to engage in that program prior to the next round of Rails opening up.
But then also, as you develop your program, you're actually thinking about what the intern will be able to do in your program. So it allows you that time to ramp up and then truly think about how an intern fits into what you're trying to do as an organization.
Wonderful. Okay. So when you say verticals, do you mean categories?
So the verticals do not refer to the 3 grant categories, which are acceleration, innovation, and leadership. Instead, the verticals refer to the industry sectors within the SUTTLE framework. In the guidelines, those are referred to as focus areas. And the reason why they're referred to as focus areas is because there are 2 additional focus areas in addition to the SUTTLE verticals, which are social innovation and entrepreneurship, as well as startup enablers.
All right. Laura asks, how do we join the Facebook group? So
if you just click the link to the Facebook group, you can ask to join, and we'll approve your request.
Let's see, and I'll head back to the slides real quick so you can see the link. There it is. Facebook.com/groups/SAC Urban Tech is our SUTTLE group. Oh, okay. Go back down because I think this one. So Laura says her question about the 1 million was not the 1 million overall, but if it's been proportioned out into different grant categories, the answer is no. We have not determined how much of the $1 million is allocated to different grant categories. Right now, it's just a pot of $1 million overall. So we're not trying to say that we know which categories will get the most grants, because for all we know, everyone will want to apply for leadership grants. So we haven't specified that like we did with the creative economy grants.
Okay, the next question is, what do you mean by accelerator? So accelerators are, here's the difference between an incubator and accelerator. An incubator is really a program that helps you as someone with an idea try and further develop that idea into a business. And then an accelerator program assumes that you already have the business, you already have some customers, and now you're really looking to scale and grow that business significantly. So that's, and if you Google accelerator programs, you'll find lots of information out there on accelerator programs. So when will the report be out? Let's say by tomorrow morning. We'll work on it this afternoon and try to get it posted by tonight. So just check back. The big thing is on the guidelines. We can keep updating those with links, as well as innovatesac.org. We'll just keep updating as folks request stuff. We'll just keep posting additional links to it. Okay, that's thanks. So yeah, if this person has posted an article where you can learn more about last year's grantees, so hopefully that's helpful. Again, we'll be posting. It sounds like there's a lot of interest in the prior year grantees, so we'll definitely be posting that soon. And
if you'd like a very, very brief overview, the Economic Development Department also posted some of those on their city page. You can just search that on the city's website.
Okay, will semifinalists who become finalists know their score before presenting in finals? No. Sorry. Okay, you mentioned a non-Facebook group. So it's a Facebook group, but it's not the Urban Tech one. It is Sacramento Creative Economy. So if you just type in the search bar for Facebook, if you're logged into Facebook, top of the screen has a search bar. Just type in Sacramento Creative Economy, and that's the group that we were referring to. Is there a way to download the form to complete offline? The easiest way to do that is on the front page, just enter your email address. That'll take you to the main set of questions. From there, just copy and paste into a document. Unfortunately, we don't have an offline application. And this is the link that that we had referred to earlier. So thanks for sharing that, Jeff. And I believe that's the last question. Let's see if there's any more here.
Oh wait, there was one. Keep going. Down, sorry. Keep going. This one. Did you? Okay.
All right, and Jeff has posted another link. So we're going to end it here. Trying to just, yeah, I'm going to present this last question so you can see it. Yeah, thanks everyone for all these questions. We'll, again, we're just going to as much of this as possible, we'll just create a list of links, because a lot of this is really just asking for additional information. So that's really easy for us to post and send out to you all. Again, there's a way to ask additional questions if you have any more. But with that, I think we're going to end the webinar.
Yep. If you have additional questions that we didn't get to, because I think there might have been a couple that popped up, but the link at the bottom of the YouTube description should have it, and that's that question and answer feature on GitHub.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.